Hi everyone, my name is Claire Morenon. I'm CISA's Communications Manager, and I am here today with Jake Levin, who is known also as the Roving Butcher, and the author of Smokehouse Handbook, a recent book that came out from Story Publishing about smoking meat and other food products. And today we're going to talk about his book. We're going to talk about smoking meat as a food preservation tactic and a way to create delicious foods at home and the whole gamut of things. So Jake, do you want to start by just telling us a little bit about your book and orienting people to it a little bit?
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me. So the book is it's a comprehensive guide to smoking. So it sort of goes through the basic principles that underlie any sort of smoking technique, and then goes into a little detail about the various smoking techniques. And then it's also a guide to building your own smoker. So whether that's a stovetop smoker all the way to a tri-purpose smokehouse in your backyard. And it also comes with a lot of different recipes.
Cool. For people who are total newbies, what is the place that you would recommend people start? So when we're talking about smoking meat, mostly, you go over some other foods in your cookbook, but we're mostly focused on meat. So we're talking about like bacon and some types of sausage and smoked pulled pork and barbecue and all of that. So for people who are interested in figuring out how to make those sorts of foods at home, where should they start? What's like the 101 first things that they need to know?
That's a great question. So I recommend people start the way I started, which was when I first got interested in smoking. It was before I was even a professional butcher. I was living in a small apartment in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I got myself a stovetop smoker. And I just started with a fillet of salmon. You know, it was relatively affordable, and it took a short amount of time to smoke. I could smoke it on my stovetop in about 15, 20 minutes. And then I moved on to doing a whole chicken. And then once I sort of got the hang of that, both with using smaller cuts and more affordable cuts. So when I messed it up, which I did often in the beginning, I didn't feel like I had wasted a lot of time or money. You know, I had spent 20, 30 minutes on it and had spent $20, $30 on it. Then you can move up and start playing around with your grill. If you have a gas grill or a charcoal grill in your backyard, you know, buy some pork chops, maybe even buy a rack of ribs, and you can start to play around there. Once you get the hang of the basic sort of timing and temperature, you can really just keep getting more and more complicated and elaborate. And eventually you'll be able to smoke briskets and do some cold smoked bacon, etc.
Nice. Yeah, that makes it feel very accessible just to start small, and then you can figure out where to go with it.
Start small, both with what you're smoking and how long you're smoking. Really just start to play around.
Right. So your focus is on local meat. You work as a butcher. You work with local farms all around the region. Can you talk a little bit about why supporting local farms and using local meat is important to you, and if you have any tips about sourcing meat and picking the right cuts and that sort of thing?
Sure. So sourcing locally is really important to me. It's why I became a butcher. I wanted to become a part of the local food movement. And being a butcher was the most sort of appealing avenue for that for me. And to me, it's really important for multiple reasons. It's really important because it's an incredible way, especially in our community here in Western Mass, whether it's the Berkshires, the Pioneer Valley. We have so many small farms, and the only way we can support them is by buying from them. So supporting our local economy, but it also is really important environmentally. You know, conventional meat production in this country and throughout the world is devastating for the environment. And what our local farmers are doing with the way they're raising livestock, it's regenerative. It's not just that it's not bad for the environment, it's actually helping to create a stronger environmental system. And then furthermore, and this can often be overlooked, but it's just an incredible way to strengthen our community. You know, the amount of friends and neighbors I've gotten to know just from purchasing them, and now they are my friends, and we you know, it's strengthening our community in a larger sense.
So do you have tips? I know that sometimes if you're buying grass-fed meat, that can be different in terms of fat content than conventionally produced meat. There are some differences in terms of how the meat's raised, and that can be a consideration when people are sourcing local meat. Do you have things that people should be keeping in mind if they are looking to local farms for local meat sourcing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of buying local meat is about changing the way you think about buying meat and also cooking the meat and adjusting your expectations. So I've had a lot of people come up to me over the years and say, well, I just don't like grass-fed meat or pasture-raised meat because it's too tough, or it tastes different, or it's more expensive. And I think what you have to do is learn how to cook it differently. So pasture-raised and grass-fed meats, they do tend to have a stronger flavor because they're eating a more varied diet. And it can come out tougher because it does have less fat in it, and also because those animals are moving around more, there's more connective tissue. But if you think about cooking it differently, you can still come out with really good meat, but you also have to adjust your own expectations. The sirloin steak from a grass-fed beef is never going to be quite as tender as from a conventionally, grain-fed, corn-fed beef. But I've come to really love the bite that comes with that. So it's not just adjusting the way you cook, but also adjusting, oh, well, I'm not going to have tender the way I'm used to, but this has its own sort of pleasure. And part of that pleasure is the more intense and better flavor that comes with it. And so, again, I recommend, if you're just sort of figuring out how to cook with locally raised meat, start with something sort of familiar and easy. So start with ground meat or sausage, and then you can start to figure out, oh, well, I really like the way the meat from this farm tastes or the meat from that farm tastes. And then you can start to get, maybe you then get a pork chop, or you get a New York strip, and then you start to play around with different cuts and figure out, oh, well, actually, if I cook this, on a higher heat and for a shorter amount of time, it's not as tough and it still stays rare, etc. And again, it's about, just familiarizing yourself with the process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, in my observation, local farmers are a great source of information about what to do with the meat that they raise, how to cook it, what's the best, that sort of thing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that goes to what you were saying about building relationships, is that if you are buying directly from a local farm, you can ask the person who raised the animal, what should I do with this? And,
Exactly.
all of that sort of back and forth. Yeah. So I have kind of a super big picture question, which ties into some of what you were saying about supporting local farms. But I'm curious about how you see, so you have a cookbook, you're doing education for people to support local meat raising agriculture, and you're a butcher. So you're working in this kind of micro sense. And I'm curious about just how you see that being tied into the big picture, like our global food system, and what you see the role of the meat industry as being ideally in the better food system that so many of us are working towards, like a more resilient, more fair, more sustainable world. How do you see meat playing a role in that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's a really important question right now, especially with what we've seen the meat industry go through during COVID. Not just the way in which meat processors in these large plants were the first to have one of the biggest industries impacted by just devastating numbers of workers coming down with COVID, but also the way in which it halted the larger supply chain. So right now in this country, 90% of the meat available to consumers is processed in 10% of the plants throughout the country. And that's really backwards. So the first thing to do is it's really important that we rely less on conventional meat and buy more from our local farmers. The other thing that needs to happen is and this has really been revealed in the last few months, is we just don't have enough small and medium-sized USDA processing plants in the country. So in Massachusetts, I believe we have 2 or 3 USDA plants throughout the whole state. So I live over in the Berkshires, and we're lucky because we have a plant nearby in New York State, and we have another plant a little further up in New York State, and then we have Adams and Apples, and that's where most people are using. Those plants right now are completely booked through next March, which means a small farmer who's just looking to have 1 or 2 pigs processed hoping to do it this fall, they don't have an option right now. And I know so many farm stores right now that their shelves are empty because they can't get enough animals processed. More people are buying local meat right now, which is wonderful because they're avoiding the supermarkets and stuff. But now our small farmers are in a really hard place because they can't get their animals processed. So one thing we need to do is we need to figure out a way for more plants to open throughout the country, and especially in our region. And I think that has to be done with organizations like CISA or Berkshire Grown, working with our state government and the USDA to figure out how we can open more plants, whether those are, farmer co-op plants, or I'm really interested in the idea of a state-owned plant. I know that might freak some people out, but I'm really interested in that idea. So that's one major thing we can do, is we just need more processing plants available to farmers. I also think it would be really interesting for Massachusetts to look into a system in which there could be, right now, the only way for meat to legally be sold is if it's processed in the USDA plant. But what if we had a state authorized plant, so that those small farmers could have their meat processed in that plant, and then it could be legally sold within Massachusetts? I think that would be a really interesting option. Another thing, and people are often surprised when I say this because I am a butcher and I wrote a book about smoking and eating meat, is I think all of us need to eat less meat. We just need to be less reliant on meat. Meat should be something that's special, and a little bit of it can go a long way. So I tend to cook with ground meat a lot because I can just sprinkle that throughout my meal, and it's delicious. So we need to cut back, all of us, on how much meat we eat. The other thing we need to do, and this is hard to reckon with, but we need to be willing to pay more for meat. And that goes with eating less meat. If we eat less of it, maybe we can pay more for it, because most livestock farmers are barely making any money from what they're producing. And if we want to encourage them to continue to produce more meat, we need to help them be able to make a living from it. And so those are some big things. I think another thing is, as consumers, and this sort of goes back to an earlier question you asked, is we also need to just get used to cooking different kinds of cuts. Everybody wants their pork chops and their, ribeye steaks, but what about shanks and some of those more unusual cuts? And that's just about being familiar, getting more familiar and more comfortable with cooking different kinds of cuts of meat, and that way we can further support our smaller and medium-sized farmers.
Yeah. Right. When you're talking about the cost of meat, I was thinking about a way that we talk about that a lot at CISA is about the externalized costs of the mainstream meat production system. So right now, meat is relatively inexpensive considering what like high protein, high nutritional value food it is. And, the costs of producing it are borne right now by terrible treatment of livestock, terrible working conditions, and negative environmental impacts. Anyway, I don't need to tell you that.
Right. No, that's great. Really well said.
Yeah. And the other thought I had is what you were saying about needing more processing facilities, is that I think the sort of hand-in-hand requirement for that is that there needs to be more sustained demand for local meat from consumers. So
right.
In order for facilities to be built, in order for that sort of enormous investment to be worth it, and for farms to consider expanding their production, right now we've seen a huge increase in demand, as you said, because of COVID. And there's not a huge amount of flexibility in the system to meet that demand. But there also needs to be some trust on the farm side that investing more in expanding will be met with increased and ongoing demand. That seems really important.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's complicated.
It is complicated. I mean, you see this sort of, I know it's both true in the Pioneer Valley and here in the Berkshires, where it's a negative feedback loop of information and demand, and we need a positive one. So when there are feasibility studies, farmers are afraid to say, yeah, we want to process more because they do have all these offcuts that they haven't sold that are just building up in their freezer, and there are these spikes, ebbs and flows in terms of how much they're selling, and consumers, especially in a moment right now, say they want more of it, but then are complaining about how much it costs or that there aren't enough of the cuts they're used to available. And so if we can start to say, yes, we are willing to pay more, and yes, I want to try out those short ribs, or I want to try out that shank, or yeah, I'm going to cook with a heart this week. And then if we start buying that, then we're going to build up the confidence for the farmers to be able to say, yeah, okay, I want to start processing more, I want to start raising more. And so, yeah, it starts with us as the consumer.
Yeah. Well, this might have inspired me to go buy a heart and see what.
Great. I
what I can do with it. So to bring it back just to the micro level, is there something, is there a recipe in Smokehouse Handbook that really means something to you, or that you especially love, or I don't know, a favorite?
That's a great question. So in terms of like a good way to sort of get the hang of smoking and figure something out without needing to invest in equipment or time is a recipe which is, and it also, I like this recipe because it's outside of, I think, what most Americans think of as traditional smoking. And it's a Szechuan dish. Szechuan food cuisine is one of my favorite cuisines. And it's a tea-smoked duck breast. And it's something you can just do on your stovetop. It takes about 15 minutes. As long as you have some good black tea in your house, and a nice duck breast, you can put together a stovetop smoker with just like a pot and pan and a steamer, and it's really delicious. It's both great as a hot dish or as a sort of cold dish, and it's just it's a crowd pleaser. It seems really exciting and different, and it's really easy to put together. And you're smoking over rice and tea as opposed to smoking over cherry or hickory or something that we're more used to. So that's a good, simple and beginner's dish. And then I love smoked pork ribs, classic sort of American barbecue. And so that's another recipe that I love and I go to over and over again.
All right, so it really runs the gamut in terms of what's the best
to
offer. Do you have a copy to showcase, or we could just drop the link?
I don't have a copy with me, actually.
We'll put a link when we post this video on social media. But thanks so much for your time. So this is Jake Levin, who's the author of Smokehouse Handbook. If you are interested in looking for fun, I feel like especially during quarantine, I think most people are maybe wrapping up the sourdough thing now that it's August and it's been super hot. So if you are looking for another food adventure to take, something you can do inside or outside on a barbecue, check it out. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. I really appreciate it. And thank you to CISA for taking the time to do this with me.
Thanks, Jake.